Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Genre Equality podcast on the Genre Equality channel. My name is Hitzir,
I'm Isa.
and we welcome our new listeners from Singapore Community Radio. Hopefully you enjoyed what we've presented to you. In the past few weeks, there have been a couple episodes of Behold,
Mm-hmm.
the previous episodes of Genre Equality. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a like and a follow on our Facebook page, as well as on our Mixcloud page. You can find all our back archives, all of our previous episodes on our Mixcloud. That's our repository for
Mm-hmm.
all things genre equality. But of course, if you prefer to listen on Twitch, or if you prefer to listen on Facebook Live, you can follow the Singapore Community Radio Facebook page as well. That's
Yep.
where the Facebook Live streams are held. And of course, go to their Twitch page, the Singapore Community Radio / videos. Then you can find our archives there as well. At least for the last two episodes are the episodes that have been airing on SGCR. Hopefully you've been enjoying everything so far. As we mentioned, my name is Hitzir, and that's Isa. And Genre Equality is a podcast where we look back on the past 30 days, the past month. We talk about all the various sci-fi, fantasy, horror, animation that's come forward,
Mm-hmm.
things that falls into the broad realm of genre. Our previous Behold episode, we talked about some horror movies, some meta horror, so do check that out as well. On this episode, though, we'll be talking about more straightforward horror because, as you know, this is once again spooky season. It's the Halloween season, so there is a lot of horror out there on Amazon, HBO Max, on Netflix, on Hulu, in theaters, and etc. etc. There's horror everywhere, and we'll be diving all into that. But let's not forget, there is still indie, sci-fi, there's
Mhm.
fantasy, there's a lot of cool children's animations actually. This month, Netflix's new movie Over the Moon has come out.
Yep.
Two of our favorite series are back: Kipo and the Age of Wonderbeasts and Carmen Sandiego. We'll be talking about that as well. With regards to Kipo, it's the final season, so we'll definitely delve into that.
Yep.
But our main topics this month are big ones, like really, really big ones. And I'm sort of glad that there aren't really any big movies coming out this month, as there haven't been any big movies in cinemas because we kind of get the focus on Lovecraft Country, which is what we're going to be talking about, our first topic.
Mhm.
And then we'll be talking about The Haunting of Bly Manor, the follow-up to Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House. I will be talking about Gandhi Tartovsky's Primal. Those are our three big topics of the month, and the reason we put them up top is it's not just because they have the most visibility, but I think because they are the three best shows of the month. Would you agree? I mean,
Yeah,
just broadly.
definitely. I mean, like these three shows has pretty much like consumed my thoughts for the month in all my waking moments. I think in particular, Lovecraft Country and Primal have been fairly thought provoking.
Yeah, definitely, man. Very different shows, of course, but let's get into it with our first topic. Lovecraft Country. It is based on Matt Ruff's novel, Lovecraft Country,
Uh-huh.
and it kind of presents a vision of 1950s America where the horrors of H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic monsters and secret cabals intertwine with the daily horrors of anti-black racism during the Jim Crow era. It's centered on a pulp fiction obsessed Korean War veteran named Atticus,
Yep.
his best friend / future lover Letitia, and his uncle George. We follow the African American trio on a road trip, at least at first, on a road trip into the deep south in search of Atticus's missing father, played by Michael Kenneth Williams. You know him from The Wire, from Boardwalk Empire, from he's been in I think every HBO show in history. Little do they know that their journey will involve demons, shapeshifters, white supremacists, of course, and
Time
wow,
travel.
time travel, white supremacists who can cast magic. Yeah. So as I mentioned, Atticus, or as we shall call him, Tick. His friends call him Tick. Is the Korean War veteran at the center of this, and it is in every sense of the word, right? HBO's Lovecraft fantasy is quite fantastical,
Yep.
and much like Tick has a weakness for pulp stories. This is kind of a bit of a tribute to pulp storytelling as well. As Tick puts it, I love that the heroes get to go on adventures in other worlds, defy insurmountable odds, and defeat the monster, save the day. That is kind of what the show is. But he's also painfully aware that these tales rarely have room for someone who looked like him. His favorite author, H.P. Lovecraft, was also a vile bigot who once wrote a poem comparing black men to beasts filled with vice. In this show, Tick gets a chance to live out the plot, just like the ones in his beloved sci-fi and fantasy novels. In the process, he battles, both monsters from myth and flesh and blood ones, more straightforward ones. And on more than one terrifying occasion, members of the second group, the white supremacists, who have transformed into the first, using supernatural terrors as metaphors for the more down-to-earth horrors is a reliable staple of the genre, but this show employs the device with particular deftness, I feel, toggling back and forth between, racist cops and shoggoths and burning crosses on lawns and ghosts lurking in sub-basements. The Freemans and Letty are alternately threatened and aided by Christina and William, who are a mysterious duo who look like the whitest, blondest people ever put into existence, much less on television. And the series soon begins to argue that whiteness itself can be a superpower or a magical power, in a sense. So you've seen all 10 episodes of Lovecraft Country now. What do you think about it broadly? Let's talk about it broadly before we delve into any sort of spoilers.
I mean, on the whole, I do feel that it starts off a little slow, right? I think with the amount of setup that needed to be done, just in terms of the tone and perhaps the context of laying out what Jim Crow's America looked like in the 50s, for people who are unaware, as well as kind of giving you a hint as to what, kind of like what pulp is and what Lovecraftian horror is in general. Like, it takes a while to get off, right? I don't think we actually see the fantastical elements until maybe like way into the first episode, almost near the end of the first episode.
Well, it is in the first scene.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That does set the tone, but like after that, when we go into the entire kind of like world building of it, right? Like, we really don't get any sort of like horror or any sort of monsters or anything of the sort. Well, not of the humankind anyway. Till much later, right? So it does start off a bit slow, but I don't think like it's a fault in particular, because the moment it picks up, it can get quite frantic. Especially with all the action scenes that are peppered throughout. So in terms of pacing, I really did quite enjoy how it was laid out. The first 5 episodes did feel a little uneven in places. It does pick up significantly though after that, with kind of like the deepening intrigue and all of that. Some of the twists and turns and kind of like devices that were being used kind of took me by surprise. I think the time travel in particular was a bit unexpected. For them to include Lovecraft Country as a novel in the continuity itself was also a bit surprising for me. But all in all, I think it was fairly well done. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting exercise in using genre writing to, kind of like explicate the horrors of humanity, right? As you so mentioned, and in particular, the horrors of racism, and what people were facing back then in the 1950s and even now as well.
Yeah. I mean, for the last 400 years, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Lovecraft Country itself is it's a messy show. And I will delve into why I think it's messy and why I think for this show the messiness is good. But first, I do have to say that it feels like a collage of influences and time periods, traveling backwards through America's history of racial atrocities, and then forward to consider the many hopeful moments and disappointments from the decades that follow Tick and Letty's journey. one thing I have to focus on is the soundtrack. Sometimes the soundtrack is era specific, but sometimes they play around with anachronistic songs. You
Yeah.
get Cardi B, you get Frank Ocean, or you get the Jeffersons theme accompanying the action, or in a bold break from cinematic tradition. And what I truly, really, really, I mean, there's a lot of things to love about the show. One of my favorite elements of the show is that a lot of the the montage sequences
Yeah.
are accompanied not by songs but by monologues. You have excerpts of James Baldwin's famous 1965 debate about racism in episode 1.
Mhm.
You have Sonia Sanchez's poem "Catch the Fire" in episode 9 as Tulsa burns.
Mhm.
You have 11-year-old Naomi Wilder's speech about the disproportionate number of little black girls who are victims of gun violence in episode 8. That happens right after Diana cathartically screams, "Fuck you, pig." You have a Judy Garland interview at the end of episode 6 that mirrors Gia's own plight, one of the characters in the show.
Yeah.
So you got to get used to this blender of genres and tones and styles working together, and in my opinion they work spectacularly well together. Each hour seems to be bursting with ideas and incidents. For example, after the road trip in search of Montrose, Atticus's father, there is a crackerjack haunted house
Yeah.
story. There is an Indiana Jones-esque hunt for treasure buried underneath a museum. There is a gross body horror about a black woman turning into a white woman. There's an episode about a Korean fox succubus who just happens to love Judy Garland musicals. There is a multiverse hopping journey where a black woman can be all she wants to be. As we mentioned, a time travel episode to the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, which coincidentally, at exactly 1 year after the Watchmen premiere. I think that was done on purpose on HBO's behalf. So much is happening, and it's all so stylishly presented that each episode feels like it could last twice as long and not get dull. I think Jonathan Majors will be the show's big discovery for a lot of new viewers.
Yeah.
If you've not seen The Five Bloods or The Last Black Man in San Francisco, Jonathan Majors is a revelation here, and he has screen presence to spare. Journey Smollett returns the Smollett family name into the good graces in my book, after his brother. You all know what happened with him, lah. But anyway, Journey Smollett plays Letitia, and she's pure dynamite. There is a sequence in the 3rd episode where Letty uses a baseball bat to attack a group of cars parked around her home by racist bullies, and she plays it equally as a dance number and an action sequence, and it's as riveting as it is cathartic. But it's not all about monsters and magic and race. At its core, the show is actually about cycles of abuse and oppression, how abused children and abused people can grow up to be abusers and oppressors. How the show questions how trauma can be passed through the generations. It explores how being denied who you are, either by society or by a controlling parent, expresses itself in toxic ways later on. What do you think about that kind of theme that ruminates through the show, from from Montrose to Tick, from and even Gia is a good example of this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because like one of the major kind of plot points, right, in the very beginning is that you find out Tick has how do we go about this without spoiling it? He has an interesting heritage, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which plays into the greater part of the story, if not the whole story itself, But that in and of itself isn't that heritage is problematic, but it isn't as problematic as kind of like the generational abuse, right? That we see in multiple relationships throughout the entire series, and that even extends into time traveling into the future where he meets his own son, right? Like even though there are a lot of very complex relationships here, right? Obviously, Tick's relationship with Monrose is one of them, and I think that's probably the most clearly played out. Like over and over again, they consistently come back to kind of the root of that, right? Like the relationship, specifically within family, and how that kind of like affects and has horror of its own.
Yeah.
Right, and haunts us on his own, much like we'll be talking about probably in our next next topic as well. And despite all the flair and all the monsters and all the horror and all the gore and everything along those lines, right? Like Lovecraft Country never lets you forget that at the end
Mm,
of the day, the central portion and the central problems is people. It's humans, right? And our
mhm,
relationships with other people, whether or
mhm.
not they're family, whether or not they are of the same skin color, whether or not they're from where we're from,
Yeah.
whether they are your blood or they're not your blood. Like that
Mhm,
is the central conceit of the entire story, right? Like
mhm,
how those mistakes and failures and abuse are perpetuated or broken for that matter.
mm,
So I
mhm.
think it's a very smart way of doing it, like amidst, as you said, the mess, right, of so many things that are going on, and
Yeah.
all the visual flourishes and the musical choices and all of that, like it
Mhm.
still always reminds you, like it always comes back to that, especially in the quieter moments when there's a bit more contemplation, when there's a bit more like a one-to-one kind of dialogue going on.
Yeah.
It keeps centering on that, and I think that's very clever. And very, it's interesting that they always manage to pull it back, right,
Mhm.
despite everything that is going on at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much about the show is about cycles of abuse, and it's also a lot of it's about identity.
Yeah.
In one of the episodes, Letty's sister Ruby transforms into a white woman. How will she use the superpower of white privilege? The white privilege that she gets is more of a superpower than the potion itself. Will
Yeah.
she give up her identity to fit in, or will she use it to get some measure of justice? It explores what it's like to be a period a woman in that period as well, and why to an extent white women can never really equate their oppression to the plight of black people.
Hmm.
There's a bit of a white feminism subtext in Christina's story.
Yeah.
She is an interesting villain. I really, really like her because there are parts of her that I sympathize with.
Yep.
She's trying, and I think she truly cares about Ruby in the end too. But in the end, she is still a villain, and I like complex villains like that, lah.
Hmm.
And ultimately, in the family, kind of is about how the past affects the future. What are the lessons that we can learn from our ancestors, but also what are their mistakes, right?
Yep.
Some of history is sacred, and some of it is kindled for revolution. In the end, it's up to the next generation, like D, the Winter Soldier. Sorry about that joke. That's a spoiler. To to decide, whose blood should be spilled besides their own.
Yeah.
The questions explored are so layered, and it's a very complex show with so much foundation in the ugliest part of real American history.
Yeah.
Which is why I think Lovecraft Country, coming on the heels of Watchmen last year, is it feels a bit like a spiritual successor to Damon Lindelof's Watchmen. Do you think so?
Yeah, yeah, definitely you can. I mean, you can draw the lines there, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think like it being kind of released at the same time in the same time of the year,
Yeah.
has interesting kind of like parallels to what came before, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so I don't know if Lovecraft Country hits as close to home as
Mm.
the Watchmen
Mm-hmm.
series. I also don't know if it's as relatable to a lot of people as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like all things considered, I think if you had told me, oh, there's like Lovecraft Country, sure, I love Lovecraftian horror, Elder Gods, all of that. But if you explain the premise to me, I don't think I would have been interested.
Mm-hmm.
A- as opposed to a franchise like The Watchmen, right, which I'm far more intimately familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it definitely it is a spiritual successor of sorts,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it is an entirely different monster on its own.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's only a spiritual successor of sorts in that it uses genre and celebration of genre tropes,
Yep.
genre filmmaking, genre storytelling to peel back the layers of anti-black racism in America.
Yeah.
That's the extent of it, lah. But I think in the end, like Lovecraft Country is it's a really tonally ambitious show, and I've said it over and over again, specifically on this podcast. I value ambition
Yeah.
over safe consistency. The ambition of the show can be a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
it is much like the show itself, right? Reminds me of Hippolyta in the multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
The show likes to name itself, and it just goes full on with whatever it names itself.
Yep.
We are a haunted house story. It names itself. We are Indiana Jones treasure hunt. It names itself. So in that sense, right? I love the ambition of it, but because it is so ambitious, right? Sometimes its execution, um, it's not like its reach exceeds its grasp lah, is what I'm trying to say sometimes lah. Like
I agree.
it doesn't always nail what it's going for, but damn do I love that it goes for it lah.
Yeah. It definitely has aspirations, although it may not always have the wings to reach that, right? I do feel like there are like in considering it next to Watchmen, right? Like
Yeah.
because it's set in the 50s, and because it necessitates referring to certain historical events, right? So like obviously the lynching of Emmett Till, and the Tulsa Race Massacre. I'm not sure if it brings anything substantially new perspective wise to the table, right? And that was just kind of something I was thinking about in the back of my mind. For sure, the greater kind of Lovecraftian horror at play, with all its monsters, dwarfs a lot of the time like the human horror that's going on, and I'm not really sure what kind of message that sends. Essentially, like we always come back to the human horror, like we said earlier, sure, but every time you're dealing with a Shoggoth or you're dealing with anything of that ilk, you don't like all of that fades into the background. Whereas I think with Watchmen, the problems at hand, like the human horrors at hand, are always consistently in the foreground, and it's skewed in a way because it's more modern and because it's more relevant to our present situation in the world today. That feels a bit more of a perspective than what Lovecraft Country presents.
I kind of felt the opposite way. Like I felt really horrified by more of the human horrors, and whenever fantastical elements came in, it came as a relief for me, like And I think the show, to an extent, also brings in fantastical elements as a catharsis and relief from the real life horrors it's presenting. Shoggoths appear in the first episode at a crucial moment to eat racist cops. They are a savior, not necessarily the monsters that the black people fear. There's a lot of great filmmaking in Lovecraft Country, where it's like what I like to call the slowest car chase ever in episode 1, which works so well because it's simultaneously the slowest and the best car chase I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They have to keep to the speed limit to exit a sundown town. They're racing against the sun literally going down on the horizon. But they can't speed. It's one of the tensest and most creative car chase sequences I've ever seen. But on the flip side of it, also I do have to say that the focus on black suffering is important, is valuable, but to an extent, it also does fail when it comes to representing people of other colors in America, particularly the wasted opportunity that was the indigenous girl Yahima, who was introduced in episode 4. Spoiler alert, from here on in. I do understand. I already said spoilers, okay. I do understand why the decision to have Montrose murder Yahima. I think Misha Green was saying that it's important to show that oppressed people can become oppressors themselves. And in fact, it is the trauma that makes them oppressors. And the desire to survive and to protect. Furthers the divide. The us against them lah. That is like a smart idea, but I do feel like they could have done a lot more of Yahima in between. Like I mean, like they did a really good job with Gia. I do feel in the episode.
I do feel
in the Korean War. Yeah,
it's a bit like what's it called? Mimi and Daegu was a great episode, right?
My favorite actually.
It was so well done that I was a bit upset that there wasn't more of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like for the majority of what Gia is doing, just and her story and so on and so forth, to be contained largely in episode 6 was a bit of a waste for me because oh man, like I really thought that it was a great episode. I thought Jamie Chung did a great job
Mm.
with her role as well. The portrayal of the Nine-Tailed Fox and all of that, like I think it's just something that I feel that I can relate a bit more to, right? That particular
Mm.
mythology,
Yeah.
um, being closer to Asian culture.
Yep.
But yeah, like I do think I do agree with you. I wish they could have done more, you know, in terms of that. It's an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really they don't really see it through, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I at the same time I think like with so many things kind of going on in every given episode and how dense they are, I'll let it slide.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think in the end, Lovecraft Country is it's a story about as long as there have been men, there have been monsters, like, and not necessarily literal monsters, but the horrors of humanity, as the show likes to point out. And there's something about the boldness of Lovecraft's swing, but swings like the big swings, huge, gigantic swings
Yep.
that makes me forgive whenever they do miss, because
Yeah.
half of them are home runs, but you I love the swings lah. Like I would rather a show take big swings like this
Yep.
than not.
Yep.
So yeah, the show is messy, a bit tonally inconsistent. It does, the stories don't quite fit as a cohesive whole. I do feel that's the one drawback of the show.
Mhm.
But as long as you're having fun, as long as the themes that they're exploring are actually very smart and densely layered, like I can forgive the messiness, which is why I'm gonna rate Lovecraft Country an 8 out of 10.
Oh wow. Okay. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just because I think it was in conjunction with the rest of the stuff that I was watching this month that it kind of like fell. It wasn't as clean. It wasn't as compelling, I think, as the other topics that we're going to be talking about.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but
But yes, certainly one of the highlights of the month is Lovecraft Country. So an 8 from me, 7 from Isa. Next on, we're gonna be moving on to a really, really good show as well.
yep.
This is the second season of Mike Flanagan's haunting anthology. It is called The Haunting of Bly Manor. I do feel, first off, like I do feel like Mike Flanagan, one of the finest horror filmmakers working today.
Yep.
Not as lauded as Ari Aster or Jordan Peele or Robert Eggers, but if you watch stuff like Gerald's Game or Doctor Sleep, I think the auteur has proven his chops lah.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps none of his works have been as popular or as transcendent as The Haunting of Hill House. The 2018 series was an artistic marvel, imbuing genuine scares and breathtaking cinematic technicality
Yep.
with heartbreaking, soul crushing, with a heartbreaking, soul crushing tale of a family coping with grief, mental illness, addiction, and trauma. And 2 years later, he's turned that show into a seasonal anthology with Bly Manor. While Hill House was loosely based on the Shirley Jackson novel, this story is an amalgamation of
Mm-hmm.
Henry James's literary works, with particular emphasis on the 1898 novella *The Turn of the Screw*, which has been adapted at least 24 times. I'm reading through the Wikipedia how many times *The Turn of the Screw* has been adapted. A lot, lah.
Yeah.
This is easily one of the best of its of the adaptations. But it doesn't just adapt *The Turn of the Screw*. It tries to infuse the Turn of the Screw alongside other Henry James stories like The Romance of Certain Old Clothes, which
Mm-hmm.
is a short story from him, The Jolly Corner, which is a different short story. So they take a lot of different Henry James's short stories, which all take place in different universes,
Yeah.
and try to cohere them into one single narrative. And he does this using familiar actors from Hill House.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria Pedretti is back, Henry Thomas, Olivia Jackson Cohen, Kate Siegel, Carla Gugino, back in new roles, and Bly Manor unfolds another beautiful tragedy with a meticulous attention to detail and characters who are more haunted than the house itself. But I think while Flanagan's impeccable character work is the true line, the second season is an entirely different beast.
Yes.
Hill House was a show about family. Bly Contrast is a show about strangers and found family. In essence, Bly Manor is a Gothic romance at its core.
Mm-hmm.
It is a Gothic romance about doomed love stories. Every
Yep.
single one of these love stories are doomed, whether they be toxic or whether they are ill-fated. Different variations of that. The story essentially follows an American woman named Danny Clayton. Danny Clayton, I must say, sounds like an FBI agent from a procedural, who takes a job as an au pair to two orphaned English children in a secluded summer house
Mm-hmm.
after the tragic deaths of their parents and previous nanny, played by Tahira Sharif. As with every other haunted house tale in existence, there is a lot more going on beneath the surface than Danny initially realizes, and the secrets of the manor slowly begin to reveal themselves to its inhabitants.
Yep.
And like all of Flanagan's previous stories, the literal ghosts here serve as metaphorical expressions of the emotional wounds that they all carry around,
Mm-hmm.
and how the past and the present can echo onto each other. In a sense, the non-linear structure of this show almost feels like what if Christopher Nolan decided to do a haunted house story.
Yeah.
Everyone who resides in Bly Manor brings their own baggage and horror with them, setting up a few intriguing side plots and illuminating looks into tragic pasts. I do feel like while each story is worthwhile, each story is well told, and each story offers a necessary piece to the story's puzzle, the non-linear structure here is a bit like not as neat or uniformly enthralling as Hill House's.
Yep.
The various backstories are individually captivating in a vacuum, but perhaps a little improperly paced in terms of structure,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the middle of its season. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about Bly Manor? I have issues with it, but I do like it overall. What about you?
I did enjoy it. Like you said,
Yeah,
it's an entirely different beast from Hill House.
yeah,
People who walk into Bly Manor thinking that, oh, I'm gonna get the same stuff, right? The same good stuff as that are gonna be very surprised, I think.
mm,
Just in terms of the quality of the horror, and not whether it's good or bad, like it's good stuff. But just in the feel of it and the tone of it, it's very, very different, right? I
mm,
think overall Hill House was definitely more terrifying.
yeah,
And there was more spectacle in Hill House, whereas Bly Man is a bit of a slow burner
mm-hmm.
overall.
It's more subdued, yeah,
Yeah, and I think the main thing that you can probably harp upon is the pacing.
yeah,
Largely, there are a lot of interesting kind of twists and turns, a lot of like surgeons into individual characters' backstories and all of that. And while I enjoy all of that, and I enjoy the character work that comes with it,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't tie together nicely or neatly or with enough time and care.
Yeah, because they're adapting several different stories and making it into one story. I think
Yeah.
that's the reason why some of the stories don't fit.
I agree. And it's like in the meta story, right? That is going out, like the through line through the entire season
Yeah.
is not great. The individual
Mm,
stories are great. The through line is not. And whenever we see the characters together, right, it's awkward. It doesn't fit together.
mm-hmm.
And it feels like you get all these puzzle pieces, right? And
Yep.
they're also carefully colored and curated and carefully chosen, and then you basically try and fit everything together in like one episode,
Mm,
and then you have an additional episode that tries to wrap everything up, and that doesn't quite work as well because it doesn't help answer any of the questions. It just extends the story past what I felt its logical kind of conclusion should be.
mm,
And like, sure, there were some plot points there, to kind of tie things off, but like I didn't feel it was necessary
mm,
as well. So that's what Bly Manor struggled with in general. But I
mm-hmm.
have to say, like, the performances are pretty outstanding. I think the two kids in particular who play Miles and Flora are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Miles in particular, when he swaps,
Yep.
oh my goodness, that is chilling to watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so their place in the story is so incredibly important, I think, because it's kind of the first time where we have innocent victims, right, in a haunting series, um especially in this particular case, right? That's not their fault that they're in the situation that they're in.
Mm,
They're kind of victim of all the whims and fancies of every adult slash former adult
yeah.
in their life.
Yeah.
And I mean, as much as it tries to tie everything up, it's just kind of like a semi-sweet ending.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It's
it's
it's a bittersweet ending, like, because
Yeah,
it's tragic too.
yeah, it is, but yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I think, especially when they chose to frame the entire season as a retelling of the
Mm-hmm.
story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or I mean, like, because it's a retelling, right? We do realize that it is um a narrator that you can't necessarily depend on, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
what's the usual term for that?
Unreliable narrator.
Yeah, unreliable narrator. And then when you find out who the narrator is, you're just like, that makes even more sense because like she's not there half the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 yeah. She does say in the beginning it's not her story lah. In this very very long version of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Um, I mean, like, I generally I really really like the show. I think there's a lot of good things going on for it.
Yep.
I think some of the episodes, even though they don't quite fit together, the individual episodes are really really good.
Yep.
Whether it's a period piece back to the Victorian era, or whether it's this kind of weird dementia-esque thing where someone's kind of blurring into one memory to another, this kind of time hopping piece, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
Those are all like very like genuinely gripping individually, you know.
Yeah.
It's just that maybe like the sum of the parts doesn't cohere into, maybe like the best whole.
Mm.
And beyond the kind of awkward narrative choices and momentum missteps, I think the real thing that bogs down Bly Manor is that Mike Flanagan only helmed one episode of the season. Mike Flanagan only directs the first episode. This was shot at the same time as Doctor Sleep was,
Yep.
so Mike Flanagan was away on set at Doctor Sleep. Of course, like, it's a big budget, blockbuster kind of thing, so he
Mhm.
had to be there. So I think that Bly Manor sorely missed his directorial flourish.
Yeah.
The camera work here is solid. Don't get me wrong; it's solid. It
Mhm.
just is not expertly crafted. So don't expect to see, like single take sequences like in the
Yeah.
two storms. But yeah, like, I think that being said, the season's flaws are only kind of minor hurdles towards enjoying an otherwise excellent show.
Yeah.
It isn't as cohesive as Hill House, but there's still plenty of sumptuous storytelling to savor here.
Yeah.
As you were pointing out, I think Pedretti is exceptional once again in the lead role, as are
Mhm.
many of the supporting performances. The kids, Amelia Eve as Jamie, Tania Miller as Hannah Gross, are also terrific.
Yep.
Um, One thing I do have to point out is the guy who plays Luke. Um,
Mm.
Peter Quint, the guy who plays Luke and Peter Quint here.
Yeah.
His the less said about his Scottish accent, the better, because
Yeah.
it is horrendous. Oh my
Yeah.
god, that is the real horror of the season. Every time he opens, like, the thing is, right, like, his emotion, like his actual acting, like, facials,
Yeah.
expression, mannerisms, it's all fine. It's
Yeah.
just that when he tries to speak with a Scottish accent, it just so takes me out of it. It's so bad.
And he becomes a caricature at that point, right? Which is a waste because his lines are like chillingly great, right?
Yeah,
Like the character he plays is terrifying.
yeah,
In this kind of like manipulative, like toxic masculinity,
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah,
work.
yeah.
But yeah, every time he does that, and the problem is it's even worse because everybody else in the cast has amazing accents,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like yeah, that really kind of like threw me for a loop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the way I kind of like divided everything in when I was watching the whole series is you pair them off, right? Because the stories are all paired off, right?
Mm.
So you got Danny and Olivia, no, and Jamie,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you have Peter and Rebecca and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I feel like there was as great as Victoria Pedretti's um individual performances across the episodes were. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like her character was very inconsistent in some ways, right?
Mm.
Like her backstory, who she is in her backstory, and then who she is at the manor, right? And then who she is after the manor, like feels like completely different characters to me. And because she's kind of the main person that we follow, right? It's her story that we kind of follow through everything via Jamie's eyes, via Jamie's retelling. It
Mm.
does add to the sense that not everything can be pulled together very neatly. There
Mm.
are moments in time, especially I think like in the penultimate episode where you literally have a Deus Ex Machina, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intervene and say, oh, she doesn't know what possessed her, but she said that what she said, and then that resolves everything. I'm just like, really?
Mm-hmm.
So like she has an overall great performance, but there were portions in time where I feel like um either the particular person who was running the episode, or an inconsistency in the writing of a character, like Danny's character became problematic, or emblematic rather, of like the problem with the series overall.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of chilling. I mean, like, my least favorite pairing definitely is the Peter and Rebecca one,
Mm-hmm.
just because, like, I understand what you're going for. I understand the kind of relationship you're trying to portray. Not enough work was done to establish that, in my opinion, right? They just kind of fell into the roles. And Peter's character is just kind of like this wannabe debonair character with the brooding and the smoking and all of that. The accent certainly didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
But it just really was like one of the weaker characters in overall lah. And it's problematic because he becomes the main antagonist for the large part of the series.
Yeah. I mean, besides the Lady of the Lake, of course.
Yeah.
I think like the thing is that I could have been like a bit more generous with the show if they had given me like for example, right, like that episode where, I mean, minor spoilers here, but the episode where Hannah grows hops in time.
Yeah.
That is, I've seen episodes like that before, like, particularly the famous ones, like in Lost, The Constant,
Uh-huh.
BoJack Horseman's depiction of dementia.
Yeah.
Episodes like that, right? Like that episode really could have used a Flanagan visual flourish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it could have looked spectacular. My goodness. I mean, like, the storytelling was solid lah. It's just that it could have been better.
Yeah.
And I kind of miss Flanagan on set lah. Maybe he could have, like, tied up a bit, like, tightened things up a bit more lah.
Mhm.
And I do think a lot of the problems that you're talking about, inconsistencies in character, is because they put these characters into different stories,
Yeah.
stories that are not connected. The Jolly Corner is not connected to the Turn of the Screw, which is not connected to the Romance of Certain Old Clothes, etc., etc. These are all different stories, which has been they're like round pegs and square holes,
Yeah.
sort of, and you do kind of see that sometimes.
Mhm.
That's where the threads kind of fray.
Yeah.
But I think, like, on the whole, they did. Flanagan did a pretty solid job in season 2, which is not a failure by any means.
No, no,
because
no, no.
I still found it very entertaining,
Yep.
very chilling. It is stories about doom and doomed romances and dread filled romances that are blood curdling and mesmeric. And there are some legitimately terrifying moments as well, just a bit less,
Yeah.
Just some effective jump scares. But the thing is, like Carla Gugino says at the end of it, this is a love story. It's not a ghost story.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, so in spite of its shortcomings, I think The Haunting of Bly Manor proves to be a worthy follow up. If not, it's not a better follow up, but it's worthy. That is gripping and emotionally compelling, in spite of certain shortcomings, which can be overlooked overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. I do think it would have benefited from Mike Flanagan being more hands on, for
Yeah.
sure. I was watching this with my brother, and that particular episode where Hannah keeps drifting, right? He got frustrated. Like, he got really, really frustrated. I said, I get it. You can move on now. When it happened for the 5th time, and it's just moments like that kind of like lacks polish, that I expected coming out of Hill House, But overall, like, don't get us wrong. I mean, it sounds like I'm picking at the series, but it's really just nitpicking. There's so much good stuff here, and I think the performances in particular, as well as the very, very good score, it really does carry. Like, all of that you can forgive, because at the end of the day, it's an entirely entertaining story, and extremely cathartic at that.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the same time, like, I kind of nitpick about how certain episodes don't fit together. But my favorite individual episodes are the ones that don't fit. The period piece, the time hopping.
Yep.
Even the Jolly Corner, which I really, really enjoyed, which is a backstory into Henry Wingrave's affair, and his own trauma, being haunted by a shit-eating grin version of himself.
Yeah.
Those are all, like, individually very good. I think my main issue is, like, I enjoy every single episode. It's just that I feel like most of them don't fit together as a series.
Yeah.
It almost feels like the Haunting of Bly Manor could have been an anthology.
Yeah, it could have. It easily could have, and I think I might have enjoyed it a bit more that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Without having to spend kind of like the extra time to try and tie everything together.
Mm,
Yeah, it would definitely have
yeah.
been.
Yeah, so I think overall this is a 7 out of 10 for me.
It's a 7 out of 10 for me as well.
Nice. Yeah, so very good show, just not as good as Hill House, but I mean let's be honest, like not many things can be as good as Hill House. There was near perfection
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that show us. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, you got final thoughts?
Yeah. So, is any news about the next part of the anthology? Are they gonna do season 3 or Haunting of something else?
They want to the Haunting team want to do a Netflix show, a Netflix ghost story, but they don't want to adapt anything this time.
I see.
So, from indications, that season 3 will be an original story.
That's gonna be interesting. I think that would be fairly interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like whatever Mike Flanagan does, I'm really looking forward to it, lah. And another author that like I look forward to everything he does is
Mm.
Gendry Tartovsky, who returns to Adult Swim after the success of Samurai Jack for the second half of the first season of an animated miniseries called Primal.
Yep.
We adored the first half of the first season last year when we reviewed it on Genre Equality 23. If you want to listen to that review, go back to that episode. And now the show is back with 5 brand new episodes to wrap up the first season. If you don't know what the story is, Primal is a compelling, exciting, and heartbreaking look at the harsh cost of survival and the cruelty of nature set during prehistoric times.
Mhm.
The story follows an unnamed caveman and his dinosaur companion after a shared tragedy unites them. Together, they set out to simply survive. One thing that immediately stands out about the show is that it is completely devoid of dialogue. It has zero dialogue. The characters solely express themselves to grunts, roars, and gestures, yet their emotions and personality come through extremely clearly thanks to Tartovsky's phenomenally detailed animation. There is a beautiful way the series pares down character interactions.
Yep.
A glance into the reflection of an eye, a subtle change in facial expression, the tiniest physical adjustment when sizing up a potential predator, without an inner or outer monologue to hide, to hide these small shifts. Body language is magnified,
Yeah.
and volumes can be said with a grunt or a glance. Because it is wordless, its gorgeous score and hand-drawn animation stands out even more. It's a mix of stylized creatures and fantastic action that has a great attention to detail. It's very detailed. That makes the Primal's action sequences feel like segments at times from a particularly thrilling nature documentary. You know.
Yeah.
Tatovsky and the animators make every struggle feel viscerally real. They show the strain in Spear's muscles as he climbs the tree for a better vantage point. They underline the blood and the gore dripping from Fang's mouth as she manages to lunge in for a successful bite. The protagonists are almost always outmatched, and victory comes from the way they use their terrain or knowledge gained from an earlier episode to their advantage.
Mhm.
Primal is certainly unsparing in the ways that it shows that nature is frequently cruel. The show is unrelenting in its bloodshed, and the food chain is undiscerning.
Yeah.
It's a very elemental tale that is surprising in its emotional depth. What do you think about these last 5 episodes of season 1?
Well, last year when you
Yeah.
guys reviewed Primal, I wasn't the one
Mm.
who reviewed it. It was Chris actually,
Oh,
because
right,
he
right,
hopped
right.
on
Yeah,
board for the October one.
yeah. You are
So
down. Yeah.
yeah, so I revisited the entirety of Primal in one
Mm,
sitting this time around. Oh
right.
man, this is easily and maybe by far my favorite Gendy Tadovsky work for sure.
Hmm.
I think like this is peak. This is peak.
Yeah.
Gendy. And as much as I love Samurai Jack, as much as I love Dexter's Lab and all of that, like this is brilliant in so many ways.
Yeah.
I was just very, very just taken by the attention to detail and
Mm-hmm.
how creative and innovative like a lot of the choices that they made were.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many of the emotions that are displayed through the the way the characters are drawn and the character work in that sense it feels very universal, right? Like
Yeah.
we are completely projecting onto these dinosaurs, these raptors, these woolly mammoths, like all of that uh it's so interesting, right? Like how would you know what grief looks like, right, to
Mm,
a woolly mammoth? Like how do you
mm,
display that? Like it's entirely the work of imagination, and you need to touch on something extremely universal for somebody to get that without dialogue, or without an internal monologue. So it's these
mhm,
moments that like completely blow me away, and I think the score has to do a big part of it,
mhm,
with carrying emotion throughout everything. uh yeah, so Primal, like, is probably the thing that I enjoyed most this month.
yeah, yeah.
Just carrying all that, I think the relationship between Spear and Fang,
Mhm,
which apparently are the given names
mhm.
from the first episode. Spear being the caveman, and Fang being
The
um
T-Rex lah.
the T-Rex.
Yeah.
um like, to be able to watch everything at one go and just see how the progression of their relationship is
Mm.
extremely heartwarming, right?
Mm.
And it's set amidst like the most ridiculous kind of like bloodshed and fight for survival that I've seen in animation, actually.
Mm.
So yeah, all in all, I love Primal. Like, it is such a great piece of work
Mhm.
that is very difficult to describe in words.
Yeah.
Like, it's really something that needs to be experienced. And what's most interesting is that because it doesn't have any dialogue, because it is wordless, right? It forces you to pay attention. There's
Mm.
no like glancing away to look at your phone. There's
Mm.
no, kind of like half-assing it while doing something else. Like, it commands your attention at any given point in time, and for good reason as well. Just because
Mhm.
there's just so much to take in any given frame.
Yes, yes. It's both maximalist and minimalist at the same time, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Primal is, as I mentioned, the show is very savage. The show is very brutal, but the thing about the show is like the real key element of the show is teamwork. How the caveman and the T-Rex survive is through teamwork.
Yep.
Primal repeatedly emphasizes the importance of cooperation. No one can survive alone is the message. It is remarkable how much pathos, humor, action, and suspense Tartovsky has crammed into each episode
Hmm.
without having a single word spoken.
Yep.
By avoiding dialogue, as you mentioned, he's challenged himself and his animators to find a way to explore emotions that words could complicate. It's the most primal elements of those emotions are the most elemental, like the most basic of it.
Absolutely.
He reaches into the ancient past to find the roots of empathy that allowed humans and other animals to survive and thrive in a hostile world. Savagery isn't enough for us to endure.
Yep.
The show argues that compassion is just as primal as savagery,
Hmm.
and primal continues to be a stunning achievement. If I, I don't think Primal really has a big flaw at all. I struggle to nitpick at something that I don't like about it. Like everything about it is so visceral and so engaging that sometimes I wish that more animation would rely less on dialogue.
Yeah.
Would rely less on the exposition
Yeah.
and just work to show us through primal emotion, what these characters are feeling. There are very few missteps in Primal.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, some episodes I definitely prefer more than others. Some definitely feel tighter, right, in
Yeah,
terms of the way
yeah.
they are told. And that's completely understandable, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they aren't necessarily a through line. Like, there isn't like an overall plot um,
Yeah,
for us to follow, other than the fact that they want to survive. But there's very, very little to kind of even try and nitpick at.
yeah.
And yeah, it's oh man, it's really, really hard to talk about Primal. And we're singing as much of his praises as possible, but it's really something that needs to be experienced.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think overall, I would rate this a 9 out of 10.
Yep, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. At the point of recording, we still have one more episode to go.
Yeah, we haven't seen the finale yet. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. What have your favorite episodes been from this latest five?
This latest five, I really enjoyed the episode where um uh Spear has to protect Fang when Fang is injured.
Yep.
That is a beautiful episode where I think Spear actually realizes how much emotional importance how
Yep.
much Fang means to him,
Yep.
emotionally.
Yep.
Like that was the episode that really emphasizes that they were like more than colleagues in
Mm-hmm.
survival. They were actually like family at that point.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I think the standout episode for me was the zombie one, actually.
Yeah. Plague of Madness.
Blade of
Yeah.
Madness, yeah, so good, so good. I didn't expect us to go there, but they
Mm.
did. And like to get Primal as it is, and then to throw in some zombie stuff is like amazing. It's so good.
Yeah. I mean, there was magic and fantastical monsters, in the first half of season 1. There's more magic here as well,
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, it is in part fantasy. Of course, it is fantasy because T-Rexes don't exist with woolly mammals
Yeah.
and humans and all that. Like it's already fantasy there, lah. But this is a very fantastical show,
Mhm.
despite it being really about primal emotions. Yeah, I mean, do check out Primal, man. It's now on HBO Max and it's also on Adult Swim. The most highly recommended show this month, at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Next up, I'll be moving on. Okay, I'm splitting up quick hits into 2 portions this month because there's just so much to talk about. But for the first quick hits, which is the segment where I talk about shows and movies that my co-host hasn't been able to watch, I'm gonna quickly review all the sci-fi fantasy stuff that is available, and then in the second part, I will move on to horror Halloween things. So for this first part of quick hits, the one thing that I really wanted to talk about was an indie film called Save Yourselves. Save Yourselves features a Brooklyn hipster millennial couple who want to detox, quote unquote, from phones, Wi-Fi, and technology by going on an off-the-grid getaway. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they just want to go to some cabin, like fuck our emails and all of that. Let's just get away from it all. I think our generation is becoming too reliant on technology.
Mhm.
Unfortunately for them, their time away has caused them to miss an apocalyptic alien invasion. So when they go back out into the real world, it's all fucked. Aliens are everywhere. This lo-fi sci-fi comedy is quite a delight. It lampoons the high-minded ideals of this current generation, my generation, to be honest, the millennial generation. Like for example, like the guy, he makes like 3D printed algae surfboards to save the environment, and they're into healing crystals and shit like that. But then when it comes down to it, like our generation truly is inept when it comes to the practicalities of survival. Like for example, their failure to make campfire is blamed on bad wood, like that exists. It all makes for very huge laughs, and is greatly buoyed by the comic charm and great chemistry of its 2 leads, played by Sunita Mani and John Reynolds. Both Mani and Reynolds make the film an enjoyable look at early 30-something indecision, even before the arrival of the aliens, who are so odd-looking that our protagonists assume that they are pieces of weird decor. Star Trek fans will see them as tribbles. They are obviously tribbles. So yeah, Save Yourselves really coasts along with funny gags about poor survival skills and actually genuinely authentic insights into 21st century romance.
Yep.
There's basically only one joke in Save Yourselves. This hapless generation is doomed, but the variations of the jokes are so good and so damn accurate that I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10.
Wow. Okay.
Next up, Over the Moon is a new Netflix animation movie. It is loosely inspired by the Chinese legend of Chang'e. This Netflix magical animated musical. It follows a bright and determined young girl with a passion for science. Soon after her mother's passing, she builds a rocket ship to the moon to prove the existence of a legendary moon goddess. She's young enough to believe that a woman named Chang'e is actually on the moon, and waiting to be reunited with the archer she left behind on Earth.
Mhm.
But she's also old enough to understand the physics required to go up there to see for herself. She does this to prove to her dad that love is forever, in an attempt to keep her dad from moving on and remarrying. Once she is on the moon, or on this unexpected quest, she discovers a whimsical land full of fantastical creatures. First of all, the film is beautiful. The contemporary update is enhanced by director Glenn Keane's richly detailed visuals and an energetic voice cast, headed by Kathy Ang, Philippa Sue, who you might know from Hamilton, and Ken Jeong. Unfortunately, the film is too generic to really stand out.
Yeah.
This feels like Wizard of Oz and Coco and Kubo and the Two Strings and Up tossed in a blender. The songs are catchy and there is sufficient charm and genuine warmth, but there have been a million animated movies tackling the same themes of grief and death,
Yeah.
And there have been a million movies that have done it better than this one. There is enough here to enjoy for the very young, and the lessons are important, but for the rest of us, it just feels like the millionth and one version of like Coco,
Yep.
So that's why I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. There's nothing truly special about it, but it is gorgeous. I do have to say, animation is quite good. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Batman: Death in the Family. This is a choose your own adventure Batman game, and it's based on the 1988 Death in the Family storyline in the Batman comics. If you are too young, back in 1988, the Batman comics, they let fans decide the fate of Jason Todd, who took over the mantle of Robin in 1983. Todd had become so unpopular with fans that comics editor Dennis O'Neil decided to let readers vote on the Boy Wonder's fate by launching a 900 number to let fans decide if Todd would live or die at the hands of the Joker, for a 50-cent fee, of course, for each call. Fans overwhelmingly decided that Todd should be killed off, and killed off in the most gruesome way. It resulted in one of the most shocking and batshit crazy and most influential Batman storylines of all time.
Yep.
Over 30 years later, the fate of Robin is once again in our hands with the release of Batman: Death in the Family, the interactive short film that plays out, like a choose your own adventure story. It mixes in elements from the original Death in the Family storyline with the Under the Red Hood arc, which comes after that. So viewers are given a number of prompts throughout the film that can drastically change the arc of the story, leading to very different outcomes. There are a lot of different options for both Robin and the Dark Knight, and a wide array of characters, which can often lead the story down some very fun, very unexpected paths that you would not see coming. There is an absurd amount of alternate endings. I don't think I got through all of them. And clever mechanics that makes it a much better quote-unquote game than Bandersnatch. On the flip side, as a story, it doesn't really offer much in the form of character work. Which can be overlooked because the character motivations have to be binary, right? So as a movie/story, it's not as good as Bandersnatch. As a game, it is way better than Bandersnatch. In the end, your enjoyment of this depends on how much you value gamification over storytelling. I am one of those folks that prefer storytelling, so for me, this is a 6 out of 10. But I could easily see someone, giving this a 9 out of 10 if they love the game aspect.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, right? Because I didn't participate in this, obviously. So, do you feel like it makes sense to do what they did, considering that they only had one choice back in the day, right? Whether or not Jason Todd lives or dies. And ultimately, that decision has shaped the Batman universe since. Right? So do you feel like this was simply jumping on the bandwagon, or did the choice to do this make sense?
This was definitely jumping on the bandwagon. I think DC wanted to do a choose your own adventure story, and Death in the Family makes the most sense for it. It didn't need to be a choose your own adventure, to be honest. But the different alternate ends, is more than binary. It's like there's more than two options whether Robin lives or dies. There's a lot more. There's how he becomes Red Hood, whether Red Hood exists, things like that. That makes it a bit more different than the binary structure. So I do feel it's unnecessary, but at the same time, all movies are unnecessary to an extent. And I had fun with this.
Okay. I was just wondering, just because Killing Joke didn't do very well as well.
No,
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Usually DC animation stuff it's typically outstanding stuff, but the last two for Batman at least hasn't been great. So
I do agree. Yeah. So this is a pretty solid one.
Okay.
Next up, I'll be talking about 2067. It is an indie sci-fi film from writer-director Seth Lani. It takes place in 2067, as the title implies, here Earth has been ravaged by climate change and humanity is forced to live on artificial oxygen. However, an illness caused by synthetic O2 is killing the world's population, and the only hope for a cure comes when they receive a message from the future, an even further future. The message only says, "Send Ethan White." Ethan is an underground tunnel worker with a terminally ill wife who is suddenly thrust into this time travel scenario where he must travel into the future, which has already solved the climate crisis. So he needs to find out how they solved it, in order to fix the present and find a cure for his wife. Visually, 2067 is stunning, especially given its very low budget. It presents a steampunk future and then presents a different future 400 years further down where nature has reclaimed the planet, and all of it is eye-popping. It's beautiful. The locations are outstanding, whether it's your standard futuristic depictions of machinery and holograms, or even stumbling around a forest trying to uncover his greater purpose in this save the world narrative. Like a lot of movies about time travel, 2067 works best when you don't think about the story or the plot. The story hits very familiar beats. It offers very few surprises. Its primary weakness is that it doesn't really bring anything new to the table, and the characters are once again just plot devices in service of its themes and time travel machinations. The characters are not as paper thin as Dark, for example, but it's close.
Okay.
Disappointingly, most of the big twists can be seen from like light years away. But I think its indictment of greedy corporations and the selfish destruction of the planet, those themes are perpetually timely. So the beauty of it, the thematics of it makes it a solid film overall, but not special. So I'm giving this a 5.5 out of 10. Next up, I'll be talking about another indie sci-fi called Synchronic. Synchronic is set in New Orleans. It follows paramedics and longtime best friends, Steve and Dennis, as they are called to a series of bizarre and gruesome accidents. They chalk it up to a mysterious new drug found at the scene. But after Dennis's oldest daughter disappears, Steve stumbles upon the terrifying truth about the supposed psychedelic drug. The drug more or less opens up the user's mind to the theory of all time. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously. So the drug users sort of perceive time in a way that like like Dr. Manhattan does, or the squids in the octopuses in Arrival do.
Yep.
The high allows them to travel through time, but the only catch is that they don't get to choose where they want to go. I'm a big fan of the directors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who made this film. Look through their filmography and you'll find unique and compelling sci-fi films made on a shoestring budget. And with this, they're given a lot more money, and thus the film looks a lot more slick and polished than their usual fare.
Yep.
Thankfully, the duo's signature ability to spin tension is intact. However, despite an intriguing first two acts and good chemistry between Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan, the two leads, the film ultimately opts for a disappointingly conventional climax. I think I expected something a bit more thoughtful and intellectual from these two, but in the end, I think the film is more of a normal Hollywood time travel flick, which is a bit disappointing. It's an above average one for sure, thanks to the director's penchant for trippy visual flourish, but story-wise, nothing too memorable or original, so it's a 5 out of 10 for me.
Oh, okay.
Next up, we'll be talking about South Park, which is, still around, if you don't know. And if any show thrives on the chaos of the world, it is South Park, which is why Matt Stone and Trey Parker have released the show's first ever 1 hour long episode, tackling literally every fucked up thing that's happened in 2020. It is called the Pandemic Special. It's about the U.S. government's inept handling of the coronavirus. It's also about police reform and police brutality. On paper, the idea of Randy being the secret culprit behind COVID-19 sounds like a good premise. And there are certainly some memorable moments along the way. It's fun seeing this episode tie back to season 23's China storyline. I love the constant digs at people who refuse to wear the mask properly. Randy's attempt at engineering a vaccine is classic Randy. There's even a subplot about South Park's defunded police department being contracted out as teachers. This oddball premise winds up serving as a perfect examination for how poorly trained overly armed police officers only make bad situations worse. But those moments notwithstanding, this whole storyline is kind of a meandering mess. There is too much self-aware dialogue, too many random plot twists, like a secondary mustache pandemic, and not much in the way of payoff in the end. So, despite having more than double the runtime of a normal episode, the pandemic
Uh-huh.
special winds up making the same mistakes as South Park's later seasons, in that it is less than the sum of its parts. It is a haphazard mishmash of timely topics that could use a bit more streamlining and a bit more time for the creators to really think through what are the good jokes and what are the bad jokes and what are the points that they could make.
Yep.
So it feels really messy and reactionary, which is why I'm giving this a 5 out of 10.
Yes.
Yeah. Next up, I'll be talking about a fantasy movie called The Place of No Words. It follows a terminally ill father who is asked by his 3-year-old son, "Where do we go when we die?" Heavy question. In his answer, the father goes on an epic journey with the boy through fantastic lands full of mythical creatures. Obviously, this takes place in your imagination. It is written and directed by Mark Webber. He actually casts his own extremely photogenic family in this movie. So it feels like a very deeply personal exploration of grief and mortality. Their imagined journey in which they are Vikings exploring a rugged Nordic landscape unfolds like a lavishly realized playtime fantasy between father and son. It's endearing and culminates with the moment the father has to tell his son that he has cancer, which is very sad. But the film also feels like a more amateurish, homemade version of Where the Wild Things Are, Pan's Labyrinth, or Monster Calls. It has the production values of a student drama film, and its artsiness isn't nearly as beautiful or poignant as the films I mentioned
Yeah.
before. So despite a promising central theme, I found this to be a disappointment. 4 out of 10 for me. Next up, finally, for the first part, I'll be talking about Love and Monsters. It is set 7 years after what is called the Monster Apocalypse. It follows a character called Joe Dawson, who, along with the rest of humanity, has been living underground ever since giant creatures took control of the land. This is a very similar premise to the next show that we'll be talking about, so this is why I'm kind of pairing it together. However, Love and Monsters, it's about this guy. He's living underneath. The rest of humanity, monsters are above ground. So he reconnects over the radio. A two-way radio with his high school girlfriend Amy, who is now 80 miles away at a coastal colony, and they begin to rekindle their relationship long distance. Joe realizes that there's nothing left for him underground, so he decides to venture out to the surface to find Amy, despite all the dangerous monsters that stand in his way. The movie is a kind of a mishmash between kaiju movies and a romantic comedy, and it delivers solid laughs, actually really really good action, and most impressively, it has really good performances. The entire cast is in top form. Dylan O'Brien and Jessica Henwick are excellent as the two lovers. Michael Rooker and Ariana Greenwald might be my new favorite on-screen duo.
Oh.
They play a tough as nails survivors that Jake encounters, and their chemistry is gold. No doubt, the most important for monster fans are that the creatures here look awesome. Their character designs are inventive and pretty damn frightening at times. The action sequences are good, and there are heaps of edge of your seat moments for you to get lost in. A very fun, very brainless popcorn movie that feels like the kaiju version of Zombieland. So I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. So this and Save Yourselves are maybe the only two films I would recommend for my first part of Quick Hits.
Okay. Yeah. Save Yourself sounds interesting. I might go check that
out. Speaking of monsters above land and humanity living underground, we'll next be talking about the third and final season of Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts on Netflix. Take it away, Isa.
Yeah, so Kipo and her friends are back for their third season and continuing from where they left off in season 2. Kipo finds herself in an interesting position whereby she's rediscovered her mother, who is the giant monkey. Right.
Yeah.
Spoilers for anyone who hasn't watched season 1 and 2, but I mean, I think the statuette for that has expired. And right now the main antagonist in all of this is Dr. Amelia, who has absconded by convincing all the humans and all of her human friends that, mutants are bad and we need to cure them. Right. So in the third season, Kipo creates the Human Mute Ultimate Friendship Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And or at least she tries to, right? And a lot of the season really deals with trying to convince the rest of the mutes to join her, right? Because she believes that the only way in order to progress forward in the world is to ensure that mutes and humans live together in coexistence. Uh, Throughout the entire time, the thread of Dr. Amelia and what she's trying to do uh, is something that just continually hangs over Kipo and her group of friends. And basically, that's the whole of the third season. Like, she's trying her best to push for the fact that she believes in a future where everyone can live peacefully together, whether or not, everybody else is on board, and whether or not, do you stick to your principles? I think is the moral of this particular season, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's some disagreements to whether or not Dr. Amelia can be saved, whether there's redemption for her, and Kipo decides on good faith to extend that goodwill to her anyways, and then that
Mm-hmm.
plays out in and of itself. So all in all, it's a great third season,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of ties up a lot of loose ends. I think, like, as a series overall, as a franchise overall, Kipo has evolved into a very interesting kind of program.
Yep.
We the world building at first was interesting. We were taken away in season one with the whole idea that they are just these giant animals that are walking around, and some of them are now are capable of speech and are fully sentient. And humans are the ones living underground, into a much more complex and emotionally deep exploration of what it means to be
Mm-hmm.
uh as one, and how do you treat others, as and how you relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, all the good stuff is back. They've got a lot of funny quips and all of that, and if Hits and I haven't um already said so, the music that Kipo has is maybe some of the best stuff that we've gotten out of a kid style animation in a while. Like,
Definitely. Yeah.
seriously, the beats are crazy. It
Mm.
also features, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but it also features an unmissable. You have to watch
Yeah.
this. An unmissable Narwhale K-pop number. Actually,
Yeah.
several, in fact, and
Several. Yeah.
it is so good. It is so good,
Mm-hmm.
and it took me completely by surprise. Hits, did you manage to catch all of people?
Yes, I did. I really enjoyed Kipo season three. If you guys aren't aware, each mutant animal, each mutated animal on land, each correspond to a different subgenre of music.
Yeah.
For some reason, the K-pop narwhals are easily the most delightful of all of them.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Kipo, through its three seasons, weirdly enough, all three seasons aired this year, so it's actually a very new show still.
Yep.
I do enjoy Keeper and the Age of Wannabes, and I think it is one of the better children's animations out on Netflix.
Hmm.
However, I do have to say that I don't think Keeper, now that it's ended, I can safely say I don't think it belongs with the top tier.
Yeah.
I don't think it belongs with Steven Universe or Adventure Time or you know stuff of the ilk lah,
Yeah.
or even Shira, to be honest, if you want to be Netflix specific. But it is a very enjoyable show.
Yes, definitely. I do feel like the way in which they chose to portray and resolve a lot of the conflicts, especially in
Mm.
season three, felt lackluster, right?
Mm.
Like, they were difficult topics, but they're kind of brushed aside with very simple answers and simple solutions. And
Yeah.
while I'm not saying that sometimes it doesn't deserve a simple solution, it just
Mm.
doesn't take the time or the effort to kind of like nuance all of that in the way
Yeah.
that Steven Universe would, or even Shira would, for that matter.
Yep.
And but we do have to remember that Kipo is a relatively short
Hmm.
series, right? All in all, like the three seasons, the amount of runtime that you get, the amount of screen time that there is, doesn't necessarily allow for the kind of work that Steven Universe has done, or even Shira has done, for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but it does feel it is a tad disappointing. I did think that it had a lot of promise, especially in season one.
Yeah.
For us to come to like very kind of simple bows on the entire series and season three.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So season three, I think for season three, I would give it a 6 out of 10. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's a fun watch.
Same.
Yeah, it's a fun
Same.
watch and all that. And overall, I actually can't remember what we gave the other two seasons earlier this year.
they're around the 7 range lah.
Yeah, so I think overall I'm gonna give it a 6.5.
Mhm.
I do think that it is an entirely enjoyable franchise.
Yeah.
The animation is still, nice and bright and colorful. The characters are funny. The music is really inventive. Not Rebecca Sugar Steven Universe level, right? But
Mm.
still, like honestly, I can still hear the three goats and the cheese traps number. It's one
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
one of my favorites. Um, but yeah, I think we had a lot of high hopes for this, and it didn't necessarily live up to those things. Just because we are in a kind of renaissance for amazing animation right
Yeah.
now doesn't necessarily mean that everything that comes out needs to be in that league, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for me as well. So now it's time for the second part of Quick Hits 2, where I'm just going to be talking about the Halloween themed horror that has been happening over the last 30 days.
Yep.
So much horror stuff is going on. Um, Not all of it's good, but I'm just gonna delve very quickly into everything that's all the horror TV shows or the horror films that have come out lah. So first off, I would like to talk about Welcome to Blumhouse. Blumhouse is one of the most exciting studios in horror right now. It's brought us everything from Paranormal Activity to the new Halloween movie to Get Out, and now Blumhouse has teamed up with Amazon Prime to deliver an anthology of 8 films. The first 4 movies dropped this month because spooky season, and I'll review all 4. Now, of course, all 4 films, for some reason or another, because of a quirk of distribution deals, is available on Netflix, right? You were saying on Isa?
Yeah, so a couple of them are available on Netflix at the moment. Yeah, so
Nice.
for those of you that want to check out some of the ones that are on Netflix, I can't remember which ones though. I'll have to look
Right,
it down
yeah.
later.
So some of them are on Netflix, but all of them are on Amazon Prime. So you can check those out there lah. So okay. First film is called Black Box. The
Mm-hmm.
movie focuses on Nolan, a single father, after he loses his wife and his memory in a car accident. Then he undergoes an agonizing experimental treatment that causes him to question who he really is. Think of Black Box as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story about memory or lack thereof. The second movie is called The Lie. It follows a teenage girl who confesses to impulsively killing her best friend. She confesses to her parents. Desperate, the parents attempt to cover up the horrific crime, leading them into a convoluted web of lies and deception. The third movie is called Evil Eye. It follows a seemingly perfect romance that turns into a nightmare when a mother becomes convinced that her daughter's boyfriend has a dark connection to her own past.
Mm-hmm.
This movie it takes Indian spiritual concepts. It follows an Indian family lah. It takes Indian spiritual concepts of reincarnation and karma and breathes life into these elements into what is basically a story about a meddling mother, anxious that her daughter is approaching 30 and still single.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very culturally specific storyline. So for Black Box, The Lie, and Evil Eye, I'm just gonna just combine my review into all 3 in just saying that these 3 movies are garbage.
Oh
They
dear.
are they are they are so boring, so dull. Each features a twist ending that is so insultingly stupid that it makes you angry that you wasted like an hour plus watching any of these 3 movies. They're
Oh
so
no.
fucking bad. I had like, I'm looking at my thing here. Right? I have long write ups for each. I'm not gonna bother because all of them are terrible. Black Box is 4.5 out of 10.
Mm.
The Lie is 3 out of 10. Evil
Oh.
Eye is 3.5 out of 10. So all of them are not worth watching. The only one worth watching is the 4th entry called Nocturne. Nocturne is set inside the halls of an elite arts academy,
Mm-hmm.
and the main character is a timid music student who begins to outshine her more accomplished and outgoing twin sister when she discovers a mysterious notebook belonging to a recently deceased classmate.
Hmm.
All I can say is thank God for Nocturne because this is the only movie worth watching. If the setting makes you think of Black Swan, you'd be exactly right. This is a female psychosexual supernatural thriller
Yep.
that is straight up a ripoff of Black Swan. Straight up. But hey, even a diluted ripoff of Black Swan is still better than the rest of these films. Lead actress Sydney Sweeney is very good here, is marvelous here, and her performance itself elevates this to a 5 out of 10. The only movie that gets passed. So if you really, really want to watch something from Welcome to Blumhouse, watch Nocturne. This is the one.
Yeah.
Next up, I'll be talking about The Wolf of Snow Hollow. The Wolf of Snow Hollow is by writer-director Jim Cummings. It's about supposedly there is a werewolf brutally killing young women in a sleepy town. As ghastly as that sounds, this horror comedy treats these murders as a setup for a uniquely uncomfortable sitcom, one that's less concerned with solving the case than showcasing odd characters investigating the crimes. It is a parody of 80s creature features that turns into a breakdown of toxic masculinity that pervades law enforcement. The Wolf of Snow Hollow walks a tonal tightrope between a satire of male fragility, gruesome supernatural horror, creepy small town success, and if Fargo was a The Office type sitcom, it mostly works. But the sections where its tones aren't in perfect harmony are a wreck. Overall, I think it walks the tightrope well, but it falls down a few times. If anything, the film is worth watching for Robert Foster's final performance before he passed away. Robert Foster is a legend in the acting game. He's been in Jackie Brown, Mulholland Drive. Most recently, most of you probably know him as the vacuum cleaner fugitive smuggler from the Breaking Bad universe. He is absolutely wonderful here. So The Wolf of Snow Hollow gets a 6 out of 10 for me. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Books of Blood on Hulu. Clive Barker's 1984 6-volume short story collection, Books of Blood, launched his career as a horror superstar, and the tales in this collection have been adapted into films numerous times. Most notably, one of the short stories is Candyman. Now there's a new anthology horror film based on Books of Blood out on Hulu, and it is flat out terrible. This film is an awkward amalgamation of the title story from Barker's collection and new stories. They're not even adapting the old stories. Only one of them is an adaptation. The rest are new stories developed by director Brennan Barger. The three stories are woven together so closely that by the end of the film, they converge to one, which makes it cohesive, but also ends up diminishing the effect of each individual tale. This is a very bland TV level presentation that never really captures the weird horror tone of Barker's best stories. The best Barker adaptations, especially the Hellraiser movies, embrace perversity and grotesqueness in the Office work. But Books of Blood is even more sanitized than a network TV anthology episode. Truly a dull watch, or 1 out of 10. Bad. Next up is The Witches. It is the HBO Max remake of Robert Zemeckis' The Witches, which itself is of course based on Roald Dahl's 1983 classic book, So it nails the camp of its dark fantasy predecessor, the 1990 Witches, but it retains none of the charms, none of the laughs, none of the scares. The biggest strike against the remake of The Witches is that the original film from 1990 is just sitting there on Netflix to be watched whenever you feel like. So why bother with this? Anne Hathaway tries her very best to make this work, but even her considerable talents is beyond salvaging this. Yet another horrendous remake, a 2 out of 10 for me. Next up, I'll be talking about Bad Hair. It is from the creator of Dear White People, Justin Simien. This is a horror comedy about literal killer hair. It is set in the 80s, and this slasher follows an ambitious, aspiring VJ whose quest to fit into an image-obsessed industry turns deadly when a new weave develops a mind of its own. And it is as much a horror movie as it is an examination of a black workplace. On a superficial note, I love the costume and production design of this. They are evocative, immersive, and spot on. Just as impressive is Simian's steady handle on his horror comic tone, which is at once sly, resonant, and frightening. Unfortunately, though, despite its disparate great elements, while entertaining and thematically sharp, it doesn't quite cohere into a great movie. Something about it just doesn't quite gel, and I think the main issue is pacing. It's a bit too overlong. Nevertheless, Bad Hair has plenty to say about the plight of black women in particular, blackness in popular culture, and racist beauty standards, and it does it all with a fun, propulsive, but unevenly edited film. So this is a 6 out of 10. It could have been so much better if it's just edited properly. Next up, and yet another horror anthology called Monsterland. Episodic genre anthology shows are all the rage, and Hulu introduces the latest one called Monsterland. It's based on the novel North American Lake Monsters, stories by Nathan Bellingroot. This 8-episode series attempts to integrate modern social commentary with its supernatural stories, although it takes a more understated approach. It's mainly about desperate people living miserable lives, with supernatural elements adding an extra edge to what is already a pretty unpleasant existence. While using shapeshifters and mermaids as allegorical tools for drudgery of modern life is an interesting idea, the major fault of the show is that the twists are predictable and the episodes end abruptly with little resolution. Most egregiously, episodes are painfully slow.
Yep.
The pacing is grueling, requiring a lot of patience in exchange for minimal payoff or no payoff at all. Highly not recommended. A 0 out of 10. None of these episodes are worth watching. Next up is Vampires vs. the Bronx. It is a new horror comedy from Netflix that feels like a cross between Lost Boys and Attack the Block. It is directed by Oz Rodriguez. The movie plays off the concept of gentrification by pitting a crew of Bronx kids against an extremely white nest of vampires who have settled in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
The vampires have been steadily buying up property around the area, turning small Black and Latinx-owned businesses into condos, yoga studios, and chichi cafes, that sort of thing. and they're not only metaphorically sucking up the lifeblood of the hood, they are doing it literally as well. Primarily because nobody cares if poor Black or brown people go missing. It is a clever premise with relevant themes, but I just wish this film was better made. I get that it's going for old school camp, but it all feels very amateurish. It's supposed to be fun and funny, but genuine thrills and laughs are scarce because the writing is weak. This is an amusing 3-minute sketch comedy idea stretched out into a 90-minute film, and it shows. It left me really disappointed, so it's a 4 out of 10.
Okay.
Perhaps the worst of all of this.
Oh my God.
Perhaps the worst of all of this is Marvel Television's last show before the division shut down. As you know, Marvel Television, run by Jeff Loeb, has been shut down, and all Marvel TV shows will now be folded under Marvel Studios, which is run by Kevin Feige. The final show in production, which they finished a year ago, but has just held off its release, is called Hellstrom. It is the last live-action Marvel TV series from Jeff Loeb's Marvel Television Studios. It is based on the Marvel comic character of Damien Hellstrom, and it's very horror influenced, hence its October release date. Hellstrom seems to have been completed largely out of contractual obligation, and one wonders why they bothered with this. Hellstrom is a generic, dull supernatural drama that has ties to other Marvel TV shows like Cloak and Dagger, Agent Carter, and Runaways, but it's not enough for even the most hardcore canon completists to sustain interest. Story-wise, Hellstrom refers here to not only Damon, but to his sister Anna and their mother Victoria and their unnamed father, who is initially labeled a serial killer, but is soon revealed to be something more otherworldly than that. In the comics, Damon and Anna are the children of the devil, or at least the children of one of the many rulers of hell. Here, their father seems to be a demon of some sort who spent their childhood capturing and murdering innocent people, often forcing Anna to witness or participate. Decent enough horror premise, just very blandly executed. One of the worst superhero or comic adaptations there has ever been. It is right up there with Halle Berry's Catwoman, with Jennifer Garner's Elektra, with Jerry Bruckheimer's the Batman and Robin. It's that bad. It's terrible. It is like a -1 or something. It's a 0 This -1 doesn't exist, but this is a 0. Do not watch this.
Oh goodness.
And yeah, that wraps it up for all of our Halloween stuff. Although there was a lot, I got through it really quick, right? Because they all sucked.
That's a horror show in and of itself.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness. That is incredibly disappointing. Okay, so at least two of our main topics were good horror shows this month, right?
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, semi-related to Halloween is the latest season of Carmen San Diego, which is released in October because it has a particular emphasis on masks. The theme of Coming Dead San Diego season 3,
Yep.
and its 5 episodes, is hidden identities. What do you think about the latest season of Coming San Diego?
Oh, I fairly enjoyed it. But I do feel like it's not enough. Not enough of the season to actually kind of tell where this is going. I think that season one was kind of very clear with the world building and kind of setting the stage for who Carmen is. Season two, you dig a bit more of a backstory about her parents and her origin and all the relationships that she had while she was in Val, right, and how she became who she is. I think in
Yeah.
season three, as interesting as the whole mask thing is, right? Because almost all the episodes involve masks in one form or another. We even see Carmen step out of her usual red color palette to wear some interesting costumes as she goes on all the different capers. Throughout, it doesn't really quite have a very solid through line, or at least thematically, nothing has been really established yet. I'm guessing they will continue to kind of try and solidify what Carmen's identity is amidst everything that's going on. She's looking for clues about her mother and about her past and where the information that she has about her father fits into all of that. And at the same time, she has lost the very loose alliance that she had with Acme in season two. So Carmen seems to be getting increasingly isolated from the greater kind of machinations of what's going on, right, with both law enforcement and with Vile and everything that they're doing.
Yep.
And I do think it is working towards the whole idea of where she becomes, like, she really becomes Carmen Sandiego, that we kind of understand her to be, right? As a kind of modern day Robin Hood. So I think it's slowly getting there. Definitely, there's been a lot more flexibility in terms of how she's portrayed, and some very interesting thoughts about about family, whether or not family is something you're born into, something that you choose, and quite a number of themes about that. But yeah, still, it's a good 5 episodes. Again, as always, extremely informative about any locale that they visit. I find myself continually learning about, in particular for these 5 episodes, about the kind of traditions surrounding, the Day of the Dead, for example. Things about Argentina as well, things about Venice, and so on and so forth. Interesting tidbits about the crown jewels, for example, as well. Like, all of it is fascinating, and in the way that it is explained and kind of framed, and it continues to be a very interesting watch, regardless of what's actually going on in the meta story at the moment. Just for the amount of trivia and information that it feeds you. And in that way, I think Carmen Sandiego, this animated series, continues to be a very strong kind of spiritual successor from the games that it was spawned from, which I adored as a child and played constantly, just because it enriched my understanding of the world, through this very interesting kind of sleuthing game. So it Carmen Sandiego season 3 thus far still very good. I'm not really sure where they're going with it. Again, much like Hippo, I think that it is a very good animation and very good for kids as well. I think my nephew has been keeping up with it, and he's just learning a ton of stuff, and he has a ton of questions about everything that goes on, about the traditions and about the landscapes and all of that, and different cities and countries that they visit. So it's very educational in that way, but I don't think it will ever hit, at least at this point in time, it will ever hit kind of like the big leagues of animation that we're looking at right now. So first 5 episodes of season 3, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Entirely enjoyable, extremely informative and educational. But yeah, it hasn't really gone anywhere yet.
Yeah, I'm giving it 7 because I sort of viewed it as a sort of like a standalone OVA type of mini movie, like a 2-hour movie that is maybe not quite connected to the main story, but more of a Halloween kind of OVA lah. I don't think like English animation has the language to set aside standalone stories like this that really don't have a place within the larger canon, but are fun regardless.
Yeah.
You know, So yeah, like if you're an enemy fan, think of this as an OVA, like, and if you think of it that way, I think you enjoy it a bit more.
Yeah.
I do think that Carmen Sandiego, I do prefer it to Kipo if I were to recommend it to children.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think it's more consistently entertaining, and number one, it's more educational also lah for kids. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like, okay, so what I feel is kind of interesting is the fact that we've reached a point in time whereby Carmen has been on top of her game for 2 seasons now, and she's reaching the point where the villains that she's faced off with and kind of bested are done with, right? And there isn't anyone who is particularly who is good enough to continually come back as kind of an arch nemesis yet. You know, so the inclusion of all these new characters that are coming on board as just like these random third-rate henchmen with weird ass names, like the troll, for example, was kind of like
they're the new graduates, right?
Yeah, they're the new graduates, and they've been groomed specifically to hunt down Carmen Sandiego. So that was kind of an interesting way to kind of go about it, you know. But I do think that if they want to kind of grow the story from there, they're gonna have to kind of buckle down on a like arch nemesis, right? As with all kind of good anti-hero stories such as this one.
Definitely agree, man. But I mean, I'm eager to see where Carmen Sandiego follows up from here. It hasn't really let me down.
Yep.
Very consistent show. Finally, for this episode of Genre Equality, we'll be going to the pull list. The pull list is where I talk about various books, comics, graphic novels, mangas, manhwas that have come out that have caught my eye or my co-host's eye. This is where we recommend literature. Don't just watch things; you can read things too. And in this particular month, I would like to talk about, since it is Halloween, I'd like to talk about a book that I read this year called Mexican Gothic. It is by an author called Sylvia Moreno Garcia. It is a feminist horror novel inspired by Gothic classics like Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, but it's also a nod to old school macabre fairy tales, like the ones where Cinderella's sisters chop off your feet, and Sleeping Beauty's stepmother dies in a barrel of snakes, those kinds of dark fairy tales. And it's also rooted in the ancient mythology of Mexico, where the author was born. Mexican Gothic follows a 22-year-old lady by the name of Noemi Taboada, a rich, flirty party girl living in Mexico City in 1950. But there's more to Naomi than her expensive clothes and penchant for fancy cigarettes. She wants to attend college and pursue a degree in anthropology. That in itself is a horror story for her affluent parents who want her to focus on finding a husband. But Noemi's father promises that she can continue her education if she first checks in on her cousin Catalina, who lives with her husband Virgil in his family's ancestral home in the countryside. So she goes to check on her cousin. Catalina has written a letter in which she claims that her husband is slowly poisoning her at their home, which is quote unquote is sick with rot, stinks of decay, brims with every single evil and cruel sentiment. It's an old house atop a hill with mist and moonlight, like an etching in a Gothic novel. The place is called High Place. It is an ominous presence, and Moreno Garcia, the author, uses its grim atmosphere to great effect. It's a gloomy wreck filled with dusty antiques and oddly robotic servants. There is a snake motif that garnishes fireplaces and rugs and furniture. Mold and fungus grow on everything. And Noemi discovers that Catalina is sleepy and confused. She keeps saying, there are people in the walls. Catalina says, there are people and there are voices. I see them sometimes. The people in the walls. And they're dead. Soon, Naomi begins having nightmares and starts sleepwalking herself. And the descriptions of her hallucinations are hypnotically poetic. Virgil and his creep fest of a family are equally disturbing. So Noemi wants to escape with Catalina, but the house and its inhabitants have them spellbound. Mexican Gothic drips with a miasma of dread for these captive women, especially after we learn what this strange family has in store for them. But this is a novel about powerful women as well, not victimized women. Not just the headstrong Naomi, but also surprisingly Catalina and Ruth, who is a dishonored ancestor whose own power may prove invaluable to them for their survival. Mexican Gothic is such a gripping page turner, and the true identity well, I won't say identity because that reveals a part of a mystery. But the end of the mystery
Yeah.
is really really satisfying. And the fate of this woman is an intoxicating tale, a intoxicating mystery that makes the book impossible to put down. I read this in one sitting over 4 hours. Didn't get up to go pee. Didn't get up to like make a drink or anything. Just
Damn.
cover to cover, finished it. Next thing I knew, it's like, oh shit, that's it. I haven't consumed a book like this in a long time. One of my favorite novels, not just genre of the year. Mexican Gothic, great Halloween reading. I'll give it 9.5 out of 10.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might need to borrow that copy from you.
Sweet, yeah, definitely, and it's if you want to, you can buy it on Amazon, you can buy it on Kinokuniya. I actually borrowed it from a library, so I can't lend it to you. But
Oh, right. So I can get it from the library.
You can get it from NLB as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sweet.
This actually came out earlier this year, around March or April. Obviously, it takes a few months for it to come into the library, so I waited for NLB to pick it up, and then
Mhm.
I could get it for free, lah.
Mhm.
But support your local libraries. They're important too.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. I went to the library, right, and I realized that I hadn't like borrowed a book. I had been buying books all this time. I hadn't borrowed a book in 17 years.
Really?
Yeah. So I was very shocked that I had no idea what the new procedures were. I had to ask the clerk for help and everything. So I had to get a new card and etc. etc.
Oh, you need a new card?
Well, you can get a new card if you want a card lah, but you can
Right.
actually just use your IC. But my IC is not registered under the new system.
I see. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I've borrowed most of my life growing up. I've borrowed like tons and tons of books. I would max out the limit every time I had a chance, especially when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And until I had enough money to start buying books.
Mm.
And then now that I've started buying books, I have a pile of books that I've said I've always going to read, but I haven't actually done so.
Mm.
Yeah, but local libraries are great, guys. Please, they are the analog equivalent of streaming on Netflix.
Definitely. Support your local libraries and support your local bookstores. Maybe
Yep.
maybe buy this book at a local brick and mortar store. They really do need your help, especially because COVID-19 has really cut down their earnings this year.
Yep.
A lot of local bookstores all around the world, small mom and pop shops, are going bankrupt. So if you can, try to buy your books not from major retailers,
Mhm.
but from your small little bookshops here and there. They
Yeah.
really need your help.
Yeah, God knows Bezos doesn't need any more money.
Definitely, but of course, like if you're too scared to go out, there's always like Amazon, they can deliver to your house. But I actually think a lot of bookstores have delivery systems as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering next month.
Mhm.
It's actually going to be a big one because I wasn't expecting this to come out. But the Demon Slayer movie Mugen Train,
Yeah.
aka Infinity Train, not to be confused with the other cartoon Infinity Train, will be coming out in Singapore cinemas at least on November the 19th, I believe.
Yep.
It is an NC-16 movie, and we're gonna go check that out. We can't wait to see the new Demon Slayer. The 2020 reboot of Animaniacs also debuts on Hulu. Animaniacs, one of the best cartoons of all time, fantastic. I was way too. A lot of the jokes went over my head. It was way too adult. Animaniacs, to be honest, right, to me is the precursor to BoJack Horseman with the kind of deconstruction of Hollywood that goes on with Animaniacs, just in a very more short form sketch comedy kind of thing. Very good. Possessor is a movie I'm really looking forward to. It is by David Cronenberg's son, Brandon Cronenberg, and from what I hear, his son has outdone him in terms of body horror. Everyone's saying this is the most disturbing film of the year, at least in terms of just gross body horror.
Yeah,
and I can't wait to see whether Brandon lives up to his dad's very very high standards.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, those will be our big topics. I will be talking a little bit about Supernatural, which ends its season 15 run next month also. I gonna be honest, I've not watched the last 10 seasons, but I will but I will be talking about what Supernatural means to me and why I think it has such a long shelf life. To be clear, I have seen some episodes of Supernatural over the last few seasons, like if they have a musical or they have like special gimmick episodes like the crossover of Scooby-Doo, things like that. So I've seen bits and pieces here and there and it's still really good. So I'd like to talk about it. ISIS Anime Corner returns.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about a lot of returning titles that have been very, very hype, and a couple of really, really good, really interesting new originals that are coming out that I'm absolutely enjoying right now. So we'll get to that next month.
Definitely, couple more titles I'd like to shout out. Blood of Zeus. It's actually out on Netflix right now. It is a Castlevania type anime style story about Greek mythology.
Yep.
It looks incredible. I'm gonna go watch that. Nicolas Cage's movie Jujutsu, where he plays a jujitsu master who has to fight alien invaders. It's also coming out next month. Probably
Yeah.
not going to be high art, but I will guarantee that it's entertaining at the very least.
Yep.
The remake of The Craft is coming out. There is a weird Chinese movie featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jackie Chan called The Iron Mask.
Huh.
I'm gonna go check that out as well. They play. Boy, I have no idea. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger plays an Englishman for some reason.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And one thing I do really want to recommend, if you are out and about in cinemas, go watch Freaky as well, which I'm going to be talking about next month. Freaky is a weird, it's a horror take on Freaky Friday, where a teenage girl, like a very like valley girl, mean girl kind of teenage girl,
Yep.
swaps bodies with a serial killer.
Wow.
Yeah, so the serial killer is struggling inside, the high school girl's body, and the girl is being hunted by the authorities. It's an interesting take on Freaky Friday.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean that wraps it up for this month's genre equality. Anything you like to say before we cap off?
No, I think it's been interesting Spooktober.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some good stuff and some bad stuff, and I do think overall horror is on the rise.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm hoping Blumhouse continues to put out good stuff and not the nonsense that we've seen. Yeah.
I do think that they put out the nonsense. They just like throw it out on streaming. Like it's not really important to them. The good stuff will be out in cinemas, lah.
Yeah.
And tune in next week. In a couple of days, we'll be recording. Well, next week, we'll be recording a new episode of Behold, where we talk about the U.S. elections, specifically pop cultural depictions of American politicians and their political process. We'll be delving into the West Wing, Veep, and Boy State in particular. So tune in for that. That episode will be out on the first week of November in conjunction with the U.S. elections, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Till next time, this has been Hit Zero.
This is Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.